Hello, and welcome to a new edition of Need to Know, a series of video interviews with companies who are shaping, creating, and innovating in the games industry today, and whose work will have a huge impact going forwards into the future. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Gurvir Cheema from Shipleys, Kingston Smith, here to talk to us today all about VGEC and VGTR, which would be fantastic. Gurvir, wonderful to have you on board. I really appreciate you coming along. It's lovely to see you. Before we get going, no problem at all. Do you want to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, your background, and what it is that you do at the moment?
Yes, of course, Leo. Thanks for having us. As I say, it's always a pleasure working with Ukie and sort of putting out content. I don't think we do it enough. So any opportunity we get to do it, we'll always be grabbing with both hands. So my name's Gurvir Cheema. I'm a partner at Shipleys LLP, now part of Kingston Smith. And I specialise with creative industry tax credits, of which VGTR and VGEC form part of. So I do a lot of work with video game developers, and that's the nature of this hopefully very short and sharp presentation, essentially to just deal with very key questions that are being asked on a regular basis. And what we're hoping to do is sort of ask those questions that we feel are being repeated in one place so that it can hopefully help the industry. And what we're trying to do is put it across in a format where it's, as accountants, we're very mechanical in terms of our descriptions. So we're trying to do it in a way that our creative audience can also hopefully understand and hopefully take something away from them.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, we should jump straight into those questions then. I mean, so in terms of funding, then, I mean, what can a VGEC claim be used for, specifically VGEC then?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things that we have in the UK in terms of our tax regime, and to be fair, it's VGTR or VGEC, both still, although fundamentally different in terms of how they operate, with one being an above the line credit and the historic VGTR being a tax credit. The difference being the mechanics, really, but ultimately it's always been paid in cash. And that's one of the big reasons of why, it's great in terms of funding. In most cases, either it's additional funds that, if you're going to make that game in any case, that's additional funds that you get at the end of production. Or alternatively, what you find is that it forms part of your finance plan, and therefore developers will have to then look for, only, let's just say for argument's sake, you can get up to 20% of your budget or now 20.4% of your budget. It means you go around looking for the rest. So it just means that difference is covered, and obviously in terms of it being payable in cash, it's a stable system that forms part of your overall finance, or alternatively, funds that you can then reutilize in the company.
Absolutely, and in terms of sort of contributing to cash flow as well, I suppose. Okay, yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Good. So in terms of developers, I mean, how would you say, or how would you suggest they sort of make best use of VGEC in terms of sort of maximizing its return? What would
exactly that. I mean, that's one of the key things that you want to ensure, and especially now with the changes, which I believe we will go into shortly. But in terms of trying to maximize the VGEC, it is based on the used and consumed rule. So ultimately what that means is it's based on work that you undertake in the UK. So you could have, for example, developers coming across from various parts of the world, but if they're coming into the UK to do the work in the UK, that's where the credit takes place. So that's one of the things that, to maximize the return is also to make sure that you've got most of your work taking place in the UK. And one of the other beauties of utilizing the VGEC and again, the SPV structure, the SPVs being that you can set up separate SPVs to almost host each game that you develop, is because it's a function of your company accounts and tax returns, you can shorten and extend period ends to try and maximize when you see that return. So what you'll see that in practice is the fact that if you had a game that, let's just say your corporate entity had a December year end, but your game had completed by June, what the SPV allows you to do is, rather than wait that 6-month window before you can actually submit that claim, you can then shorten or extend, claims to, your period ends to try and make that claim much more sooner. So that's one of the great reasons. And the other thing to also obviously maximize return, one of the fundamentals is the fact that it's additional funds that, ultimately should be paid to developers. And if you can try and keep that in your business, what it will then be great for is obviously to develop the company further, in terms of, especially in something as fast developing as the games industry. You would hope that innovation and areas like that is somewhere where that where that VGEC money could be utilised to try and push across. So those are the sort of key reasons of
Absolutely. A little bit of reinvestment, I suppose.
exactly that. And to be fair, that was when any of the industry credits had first come out, that was one of the fundamental reasons for why they were that they came into our industry, is that they were meant to be developers, essentially additional funds, or credit to utilize against future trade. Although that now has fast made its way into finance plans and forms part of developing the games, but ultimately it's always been that incentive for developers to do work in the UK, hold on to those funds to then essentially prosper going forward and making more games and utilizing that to develop the business further. That's fundamentally what the incentive was there for. So.
No, that's really, really good to understand. Okay, I mean, so you've highlighted obviously the difference. Well, that there is a difference between VGEC and VGTR. I think it'd be really helpful from our viewers' perspective to have an understanding of what the sort of advantages of each are.
Yeah.
I mean, circumstances in which VGTR are more advantageous to use than VGEC, and vice versa. Essentially, that would be helpful.
Yeah. I will say, Leo, that's the most number one asked question over the last few months. So definitely one that I'm very familiar with. So yes, so I mean, essentially, in a nutshell, the VGEC should slightly be better in that it pays slightly more. But there is one, well, I say it is a big change that you're seeing as part of the VGTR. One of the advantages of VGTR is that fact that you could claim on not just the UK spend, but European Economic Area spend too. And I must admit that was one of the things that was on HMRC's agenda to sort of get rid of since Brexit, and it sort of sat around for a while. And the fact that the argument has always been there for why should UK government be funding work that's undertaken in the European Economic Area, and that's one of the things where the drive had come from to try and change that theory and bring it in line with the other credits, which doesn't actually provide any credit on work done in the European Economic Area. So I guess for those developers that are undertaking work in Europe, to varying levels in the European Economic Area, and they have historically claimed on those amounts, VGTR would obviously be more advantageous. And one of the other things that's more advantageous under the VGTR is now that you've got under the VGEC, you have this notional tax charge, which now to be Pillar 2 compliant, there is a tax charge that's applied on the expenditure credit. I think we all remember when the VGEC was first announced, and the headline percentage of 34% sent everyone into meltdown, thinking this is going to be brilliant. And then very fast they realised that actually that's taxable, and it's taxable at the main rate of 25%. And so the net benefit that you get back is essentially replaces the VGTR's 25% by 25.5%, which of course is subject to the 80% worldwide cap. So not as that favourable. But that tax charge is under the VGEC is for large businesses subject to quarterly instalment payments. I won't go into the details and bore everyone of what that is, but if you're part of a large business, what that means is you have to pay that tax charge on the VGEC in 4 quarterly instalment payments. Of course, that doesn't exist under the VGTR. So those are the 2 main benefits of why you'd continue with the VGTR. The VGEC now. So in terms of the benefits, of course, we've touched on the fact that you get the uplifted rate. There was under the VGTR, there was the cap on subcontracting spend of 1 million, which now is removed. I mean, I'm not sure whether that sounds, that it's going to be a benefit or not is still yet to be seen, because I'm guessing a lot of the 1 million contracted work that took place historically was to try and limit what you were doing in European, to limit what was being done in the European Economic Area. But if that's now disappeared completely, you might not actually see any benefit from it. So I'm sure that will vary from production to production. the other thing now is under the VGTR, there was the minimum spend requirement of 25% in the UK and the EEA region. That now has dropped to a minimum 10% of core spend requirement in just the UK. So that's essentially beneficial in the sense that you have to spend less in theory on core spend in the UK. But like I say, it does exclude the EEA region. So again, it may not impact certain projects. But that is more in line with all the other creative industry credits that we have. One of the downsides I say to VGEC is there is this additional scrutiny on connected party transactions. So under VGEC, you do have to disclose transactions that have taken place with connected company entities. And part of the driver for that is to ensure that everything that's being charged is on an arm's length basis. So that was one of the key reasons of the changes. And I must admit, having spoken to HMRC, one of the key areas they're seeing in terms of sort of misuse and abuse of the system was actually in the video games industry. So in terms of their modelling, what they're trying to find is that any transactions that are being charged cross-group are on an arm's length basis, and the onus now is on the essentially the developers to show why they believe they are arm's length.
No, it's all helpful to understand. I mean, it's interesting. We're obviously in this sort of period of transition, I suppose.
Yeah.
When is that cut-off point for companies applying for VGTR?
Yeah, I mean, hence why I do hope we've sort of put this content out sooner, because it's not far away. So if you start developing on the 1st of April next month, in theory, you can't claim VGTR. So for all those developers that have got work going on in the European Economic Area, you need to start development this month to still be able, if you want to qualify that spend under VGTR. Because once we get to the 1st of April 25, and you start development after that date, then unfortunately you've got to take the VGTR or VGEC. Or I'd say unfortunately, could be fortunate depending on what your circumstances are.
Of course.
So for those that do start development before the 1st of April and are hoping to still continue claiming VGTR, there is a sunset date of the 31st of March 2027. So that's when it sort of disappears completely. I think they've sort of said that you've got a 2-year window that if you're in development, you should really have completed the game by that point. So that's where that sits. I will just add to that, because one of the questions I've had quite recently and quite often is that what defines development? And the definition is, although I mean the onus is a lot on the developers to show where the video game sits, but what the strict definition is that it's once the game has completed its initial concept and design, and it's relatively certain that you're going to go ahead. That's when you start forming part of that development stage. So that when that decision is made to go ahead with the game drives when which side of the date you fall on.
Yeah, that's really helpful to understand. Obviously, games take an awful lot of time to develop half the time.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and it's the nature of the beast, really, because initial concept and design, some may argue, and I've spoken to various developers, and some would say that forms part of you're definitely going ahead, but you've got to draw the line somewhere. In terms of the initial concept design has always been seen to be early development, and you're not going ahead. So that would fall before. So the argument is you definitely won't. You can't say that you're definitely going ahead on a game if you're in the initial concept design stage. But I guess if you're in, if that's then been signed off and approved, and you've got a plan in place that you're definitely going ahead, that's when then you can say that you're in theory in development.
Absolutely. Okay. So thinking more specifically then, I mean, how long does these funds take to be received by the games companies? What sort of lag time is there? What can people sort of expect, and how can they plan ahead for that sort of eventuality?
Yeah, I mean, historically under the VGTR, you've always found that the turnaround time by HMRC has been 28 working days. And under VGEC, because I mean, what you've got to appreciate is now there is a requirement for you to disclosure connected party transactions to them. So there's more information for them to get through, so in terms of their review processes, there's now this additional information form that needs to be submitted, which I think we will touch on shortly. So there's, naturally, if you've got more information to review, the processing times are going to take slightly longer. So currently they are saying 40 working days. But I will say, obviously, it's early days for them in terms of volumes of claims. I guess as and when that increases, so may the turnaround time. But we're told at the moment, in terms of the department itself, they will aim to try and turn around claims within 40 working days. So.
And is there anything that you can do to sort of speed up receipt of the funds?
Yeah, brilliant question. Because I guess the additional information form is one of those things that HMRC have now required, and the AIF forms are now required whether you're doing VGTR or VGEC. And the main reason is that they're trying to streamline the information that's being provided to them to ensure everyone is ticking certain boxes. So speaking to the creative industry on a regular basis, we're aware that they get certain claims that are sent to them, and there might not be, for example, a calculation in place. There might not be the certification attached. So what the AIF forms are doing is that they're almost making sure that a lot of that information is provided up front. Naturally, in terms of speeding them up, I guess it's if they've raised any questions, then you want to sort of try and ensure you provide them with as much information as required up front, and then responding to those queries in a efficient manner. It's very difficult to pin a time in terms of speeding up HMRC, and what the industry's got to realise is it's one department that looks after all the incentives across the creative industry regime. So I couldn't start to think the volume of claims that they get in. Just the ones that, for example, our firm submit alone probably can keep them busy. And that's what you've got to appreciate. And one of the other things that does speed them up, I guess, is historic understanding with them. And if you're using your advisors, for example, that are submitting those claims, naturally they're going to look into it with slightly less scrutiny in the sense that they would assume that the advisors have done their due diligence and undertaken some procedures before submitting those claims, which gives them a degree of more comfort. Whereas if you're submitting your own claim, naturally they're going to of course required to look into it in a bit more detail.
Absolutely.
So does also speed up the claims.
Thinking in terms of sort of timelines then, obviously there's some certification that's involved. So, when should developers sort of consider applying for their BFI certificate and their final certificate as well?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, so the interim certificates are if you're doing interim claims, and I'd always advise that you submit them as soon as possible. It's a free process, in terms of submitting them. And even if you're not making interim claims, I always say that if you can try and get that certification in, it's worth doing. Purely because you also get the comfort of knowing your project, your game passes the cultural test, and if it also gets it on the radar of the BFI. So I think that's always a good reason to submit them. On the final certificates, it is how soon you can apply for them is taken out of your hands to a certain degree, because you've got to give them the game. So that's the reality of you've got to actually have completed the game to be able to make the final application. But I would say as soon as possible. So the second you've got a playable game in its final version, I'd insist on making that final application to the BFI, because it can take them up to 12 weeks to turn that around. And they are getting faster. It did get to a point where it was on 16 to 18 weeks. But they are coming down. So that's good news, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, I'm sure as we all get used to the processes involved, things should sort of speed up a little bit. But obviously, don't want to make any promises on anyone's behalf. So thinking about the future, then, do you envisage VGEC changing much for sort of smaller companies? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, the hope is that similar to what we've seen in the film industry, where there is the new independent film tax credit that has been announced and goes into, and you can start making claims from the 1st of April. That has been announced to help the sort of smaller film producers and the independent market. I guess there's a similar requirement for the games, where the smaller games are definitely being sort of swallowed as part of the industry. and therefore the hope is that something similar could be done, and an uplifted VGEC rate for smaller games. But what that will require is a great deal of lobbying, which I know you're part of, and Ukie are definitely, at the forefront of doing with HMRC. But at the moment, that's got to be, the sort of stance taken is the fact that lots of lobbying needs to take place for them to uplift the rate, especially when they've just announced the VGEC. It's going to take some convincing. So I think that's what the industry will be rallying around to do.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's a fair point. Okay, fantastic. Well, earlier on we sort of mentioned about sort of spend in the UK and outside of the UK. I mean, I'm quite keen to understand sort of VGEC and VGTR from a sort of a co-development perspective. Can both development studios sort of claim for VGEC and VGTR, or is it just the main producer of the game?
Yeah, unfortunately not. So it is just one developer that can claim the VGTR or VGEC, and that is always going to be the lead developer. So you've got to demonstrate which one of the two, where you've got a co-production, which one of the development companies is a lead developer, and that individual company will make the claim. Unlike, I say, the film and TV world, where we have bilateral agreements and you can have co-productions, that isn't the case for video games. So unfortunately, not yet. So
no, that's helpful to understand. Okay, fantastic. Well, I think it'd be helpful to understand as well. Obviously, we're between you and me, for our audience perspective, I'm heading off to GDC very shortly, maybe in a couple of days. So investment is often on our members, the forefront of our members' minds. Is VGEC good for investors? I'm assuming yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you feel that it's got to be one of the driving forces for investors. If you're investing in the video games world. In the UK, those entities that are claiming VGEC have got to be of a much stronger appetite for certain reasons, such as we discussed at the top, that the VGEC comes back and is payable in cash. So for cash flow reasons, I mean, if the developers are going to make the game in any case, then you're getting a credit for it. What it also then means is that you can utilize again those sources of funds to help recycle and grow the business. So as I say, especially in an industry where innovation is key, having a pool of funds, which is what the VGEC is designed to do, is that you would have expenditure credit, which you can then utilize to strengthen your business and enhance your business. That's obviously a very strong strength of the VGTR, and a strong strength of why an investor would look at companies that claim VGEC. The other part that I did say on the flip side of that is, if it does form part of the finance plan, it is one of those things that you could utilize to then, if your company, for example, if you had a VGEC production and you wanted to cash flow those funds, so you didn't want to finance them yourself, it's one of those things that the banks will lend against. So again, that spares up other capacity, in terms of funds and cash flow that you can use elsewhere in the business, and you can get a sort of loan against the VGEC value from a bank. So again, something else that, for an investor's point of view, it means that if they don't want to tie up funds into the development of a game, which they felt they were doing, again, you can utilize bank funds to cash flow the VGEC. So another reason for why I feel like it's a strong point. And also the UK video games market is very strong, so again, the appetite for investors seems very strong given how well we produce games. So yeah, that's got to be the strengths for investors.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Gurvir. I mean, do you want to give us some maybe some final thoughts on sort of what producers need to think about when they're transitioning from VGTR to VGEC?
Yeah, so sorry, lots to take on there in a short window. So I did say at the start that we try and keep it short and sharp, but I think we've gone to length. But just in terms of what they should be looking out for, of course, there's that additional scrutiny on connected party transactions. So I'd say one of the things when moving to VGEC is to make sure that you keep track of what recharges are taking place, and and why they deem them to be arm's length, and certain things like, for example, if you've got quotes off competitor entities and you use that as a demonstration, or rate cards that you've charged on other games, those sort of things are the ones that you want to ensure you're keeping track on. Where you place people for work, of course, if you're under the VGTR structure and you've been placing individuals in the EEA region, of course, that's now due to change. So please do track where people are doing their work, because that is going to be key for VGEC. And as I said, for large businesses, when you've got those quarterly installment payments, it's the sort of thing that you can easily get into your mind that you take the VGEC rate, you take the tax off that, and that's what you get back. But you forget that tax element, if you're a large business, needs to be paid up, in quarterly installments. So don't forget those payments to HMRC, otherwise they will charge you interest on them.
Absolutely. Well, Gurvir, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really fascinating talking to you. I think you've done a fantastic job of cutting through everything and really giving our audience a flavour of all things VGEC and VGTR, and obviously, signposting to your services as well. I'll pop a link down for people to get in touch. But yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. And as I say, pleasure to always, to assist and sort of answer any questions that are raised. Equally, as I say, if there's other questions that come through for yourselves, or if anyone wants to get in touch, more than happy to address them. But I think this is always a good means of getting a lot of content, a lot of the regular asked questions out there, so that hopefully they could be of use. Brilliant.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. And thank you today for our audience who've tuned in to catch this video. There's plenty of other need to know videos out there on our Ukie TV channel on YouTube. Thank you for enjoying this one, and more very soon. Thank you so much.